Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Commissioners' meeting this evening. If you will join me for a moment of silent prayer, and then we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get started, I got a comment I'd like to make to the board. As chairman, I believe it is my responsibility to make sure that each meeting of the Board of Commissioners is held in an orderly fashion. As chairman, I expect each member of this board to treat every other member of this board with dignity and respect. I hope moving forward we can conduct peaceful meetings and have meaningful discussions without the need for political controversy. Thank you. Ms. Clay.
Good evening. Lynn Claggett from 108 J Lane, Providence, North Carolina, and I'd like this recorded verbatim, please. The annual budget audits are due to the Secretary of the Local Government Commission as soon as possible after the close of the fiscal year, typically by October 31st. The fiscal year closed June 30th, 2022, and no contract with the auditors is on tonight's agenda. In 2019, under the previous finance director, that audit was completed by November 9th. The following year, it was completed 9 months late in June. June 30th, 2021 budget audit was due typically in October 2021. And in November, I was told it would be complete by the end of the year. Hasn't happened. Last week, the manager, like a broken record, reiterated, quote, "Once again, at this time, there are no firm dates for the completion of the audit." There are lots of omission. You've been emailed a timeline of state and local communications to and from explaining some of the delays, some of the questions from the North Carolina Treasury to the local government, and the taxpayers and the management. You've approved an extra $75,000 for a CPA consultant, but the audit is not done. You've approved a CPA position in May, but 2 months later, it's still not posted due to lack of a job description last week. The software and the previous finance director are not the problem, as blamed in last year's delay. How do you run a business without balancing the books for over a year? As you spend millions of taxpayers' dollars, when will commissioners, as our representatives, address this debacle publicly and hold someone accountable? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at public comments? If not, we'll close the comments. Recognitions. Is there any of the commissioners that have any recognitions? If not, we'll move on. Approval of the agenda. So moved, Mr. Jones. Need a second. Second. We have a motion and a second for approval of the agenda. We will do roll call voting. Mr. Dickerson? I think you said aye. Mr. Howell? Aye. Mr. Jeffries? Aye. Mr. Owen? Mr. Ostersteiger? Aye. Mr. Massengill? Aye. Mr. Bay? Aye. Motion carries. Approval of the consent agenda A through E. Is there a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. We'll do roll call voting. Mr. Dickerson?
Aye.
Mr. Howell? Aye. Mr. Jeffries? Aye. Mr. Ostraker? Aye. Mr. Massengill? Aye. Ms. Bay? Aye. Motion carries. Discussion items, drug torture money, funding. Sheriff Turner.
Good evening.
Good evening.
As per the Department of Justice and Department of Treasury, Sheriff has to come in front of the governing body of Caswell County to request the usage of forfeiture funds from the DEA forfeiture fund. So I'm coming in front of the governing body to ask that we use $22,000 of forfeiture funds this year. Any questions?
Okay.
So moved.
We don't have to have a motion on that.
Don't have? Okay.
No, he just needed to come before us and tell us what was going on.
Okay.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, action items. Proposed UDO amendment, Mr. Miller.
Commissioners, in your agenda packet, you'll find the following resolution. Resolution of amendment, a resolution amending Article 9, Appendix A of the Caswell County Unified Development Ordinance. Be it resolved and ordained by the Board of Commissioners of Caswell County, North Carolina. Whereas the Board of Commissioners received an application to amend Article 9 and Appendix A of the Caswell County Unified Development Ordinance concerning recreational vehicles. And whereas Caswell County Planning Board recommends adoption of the amendment. And whereas the Planning Board has provided a written statement to the Board of Commissioners that the amendment is consistent with the county's comprehensive plan. And whereas the board conducted a public hearing on the amendment, now therefore it be resolved that the proposed amendment is consistent with the county's comprehensive plan because it is in keeping with existing recreational vehicle park regulations, flood damage protections, and development review processes. Now therefore be it ordained that the Caswell County Unified Development Ordinance Article 9 and Appendix A is hereby amended as shown in the attached revised ordinance. This amendment shall become effective upon adoption, adopted by the Caswell County Board of Commissioners this 18th day of July, 2022. Commissioners, this is a resolution you'll be voting on tonight. In the following page, you have the amendments made to Article 9 and Appendix A. We have with us this evening our county planner, Matthew Hoagland. I'll ask Matthew to add any additional comments he has, and then we'll open it up to the Board of Commissioners for questions to the county planner.
Thank you, Mr. County Manager. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment that you have before you tonight is really just a modest change from what you reviewed, I believe, at the second meeting in June, if I recall correctly. It's more formatted in line with standard legal text where, for example, the language to be removed is struck through and the language to be added is underlined, and then other minor technical corrections like capitalizing the term recreational vehicle park, since that also appears in the appendix. I edited this with the assistance of the county attorney prior to what you have before you tonight, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have as well.
Any questions from the board?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Why was it originally not allowed under the rules to have an RV park in a floodplain?
Yes, sir. I'm not entirely sure. The UDO was put together in September of 2013. My first day with the county was in 2018. And so I just assumed at the time when they constructed the ordinance in 2013 I suppose either the board at the time or the Piedmont Tribe Regional Council did not see the need to allow for RV parks in the flood zone, but I'm not 100% sure, Mr. Dickerson.
All right, well, how about this then? If the county approves it and it becomes legal under the ordinance, and a flood comes through and those RVs are damaged or somebody is hurt, are we exposed to any liability if we take this step to approve it?
I'm not sure if I can answer a liability question. I'll say that the proposed text of the amendment does require, for example, that signs be placed on the site notifying individuals that it's in a flood zone, that an evacuation route be established. So there are some safety mechanisms in place in the text amendment, but with regards to liability, I'm just not sure that I can answer that.
Is our county attorney present tonight?
I am Commissioner Dickerson, and thank you for the question. And I do not believe that this change increases the county's liability for potential placement of a use. That use, and whether or not it is in a flood zone, would still be the responsibility of the owner to make the site safe and usable for its patrons. So I do not believe the change increases the county's liability in the nature of what you suggested.
I appreciate that answer, I do, but we're not talking in absolutes here. Is it possible for somebody to sue and win based upon us overturning a rule that would have stopped it originally?
Well, it's always possible for someone to sue. There's no doubt about that. But there are.
Well, how about this? Is there a way that we can put it in writing that the people that open the RV park are responsible for any liabilities for anything that goes on there, and take the county out of it completely? I don't have any problem with an RV park. I just have problems with opening up any kind of litigation to the counties and the taxpayers ultimately being responsible for it if we lose.
Right. Well, just like there's any number of permitted uses that are allowed under the county's Unified Development Ordinance, just because the county regulations permit a use doesn't mean the county's responsible for what a private owner or operator does in installing that use. So the disclaimer, if you will, I believe is implicit in all uses that developers undertake on their private property. The risk is theirs, whether or not the regulations permit the use or not.
Well, I think it kind of has murky water appearance here, because if you are looking at the original rules and they said no RVs in a floodplain, and now we're going to take a step tonight to make them legal in a floodplain, and no one can tell us why they were originally illegal to put in a flood place, stop them from being put there. And if that was something that was a legitimate legal concern and we override it tonight, doesn't that kind of change the whole context of whether or not we're legally liable for anything from that point forward? You're not talking about just any standard ordinance. You're talking about an act here tonight where we're going to override an existing rule that said you can't do this. So by that kind of logic, I think a sharp attorney would use that to their advantage. I would like to see the county protected from it.
Right. Well, again, whether or not this is a good idea is a matter of policy, is what you're deciding tonight. And there may be a number of reasons why you're opposed to the change personally, or why the county's opposed to the change as a matter of policy. Is this what it wants to see in these designated areas? That's the question before you tonight. I think it is an important policy question. I see it, again, more as a policy of the county about what kind of development it wants to see where, rather than a legal liability question. But I think your point is well taken. Is this the kind of development the county wants to see in these designated areas? And that's exactly what you're deciding on tonight.
Okay, how about this one then? If there's a stipulation in there that an RV can't be there more than 6 months, am I looking at that correctly, or was I told correctly?
I'm sorry, sir, was the question about occupancy in the RV more than 6 months?
Yeah, what is the time frame? Can they be there 6 months? Can it be there 2 years? Is there a time limit on an RV being parked there?
Yes, sir, that's correct. It's 6 months for an RV park, 180 days for an individually placed RV.
Okay, so if they moved it to another spot within that same park, would that satisfy that 6 month rule where they could start over again?
Theoretically, if they move from space A to space B, I suppose they could, yes, sir.
Man, sounds like this hadn't been real well thought out, to be honest with you fellas. There's a whole lot of loopholes here that ought to be shut, in my opinion, before we vote on whether or not it ought to be done. I understand what the county attorney is saying about policy, but still it boils down to, I'm not getting a clear-cut answer from him on whether or not we're protected from liability when we're changing a rule that was in place to stop this from being put in a floodplain. A good attorney looking at that's going to say, well, y'all did your due diligence and figured out why it was prohibited in the first place. Y'all overrode it. And, you know, who knows, man, the way these juries are crazy nowadays in awarding outrageous settlements, I don't want to see us in the middle of a battle like that with any possibility to lose. And I want to see some kind of wording in the agreement with whoever's going to open this RV park that explicitly says the county is not liable for any legal liabilities from them opening that park up. If they got to take out an insurance policy or a bond or whatever the legal technicalities would be to make sure they can handle any kind of legal claims that come up, I'm all for the RV park, trailer park. Trailer park's poor choice of words, the RV park. I'm all for it. I think it'd be nice to have the overflow from VIR coming and bring some maybe jobs here and some revenue for the county. I like it, but not at the risk of opening us up to a potential lawsuit that whatever percentage of reality involves the winning of it, there is a chance somebody could lay it on us, and I don't want to do that to the taxpayers. I would rather see them protected.
Mr. Chairman, let me just clarify one point. I apologize. I misspoke slightly previously. To your question, Mr. Dickerson, occupancy is allowed up to 6 months, but it's within one 12-month period. So, for example, if someone pulled a permit today, stayed there 6 months, they would not be allowed to re-enter until July 18th of 2023.
Well, back to what I just said. Is there a way to put wording in there that protects the county absolutely from being sued over this?
I don't think there's a way to protect the county from being sued absolutely as to any matter.
Well, you answered my question. You made my mind up for me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any more discussion?
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman. I can't remember how long ago, but this board took action to make flood insurance available for all county citizens. Not only RV parks, whatever, there are several homes in flood zones. And we try to make that known to all citizens. And we also try to make that known that we took action to make sure that flood insurance was available if they wanted.
I think it's been, Mr. Chairman, about 8 years ago, we voted this thing. With the same action, I think I'm right, Aaron.
Yes, when the UDO was originally passed, it was not allowed. This usage was not allowed
In a flood zone.
in a flood zone.
I made that comment because the opposite side of that is we don't restrict citizens from building homes in flood zones. We don't restrict other businesses from building in flood zones. So there's two sides to this thing that we need to look at.
Yes. Any more comments? Board? If not, what's your pleasure?
What is the question again?
I asked if there was any more questions.
No, I mean from a relative to this UDO,
Whether we're going to
what's on the table for us to do?
vote on it.
So, Commissioners, the resolution that I read at the beginning of the meeting is what you have on the table in front of you, whether you decide to approve the resolution or deny the resolution. I'm happy to read it again if you would like me to.
No, you don't have to read it again for me. What I want to know is what is the essence of the resolution?
The essence of the resolution is, if approved, that RV parks would be allowed in flood zones. And it's not specific to this one individual that may or may not be planning. This will allow RV parks in any of the floodplain or flood zones that we have.
I got it now. I just want to make sure because I want to make a motion. And I move that we approve this resolution.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the floor to approve this resolution. We'll do roll call voting. Mr. Dickinson?
No.
Mr. Howell? Aye. Mr. Jeffries?
No.
Mr. Ostertag?
Aye.
Mr. Massengale?
Aye.
McVeigh? Aye. Motion carries. Voting delegate for the NCACC, Mr. Miller.
Commissioners, as you'll see on your agenda, the NCACC annual conference is being held the 11th through the 13th of August in Charlotte. We have 2 commissioners that plan to attend the annual conference. Those commissioners are Commissioner Hall and Commissioner Jeffries. So they have asked that the NCACC has asked that you appoint a voting delegate and an alternate for those. So since you have 2 commissioners going, I would suggest you make Commissioner Hall and Commissioner Jeffries either the voting delegate or the alternate. So I think we need a motion from the board to make one or the other the voting delegate and then the other the alternate.
Any discussion? I need a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we make Commissioner Hall the voting delegate and Commissioner Jeffries the alternate delegate.
I second it, and I thank both of y'all for going.
Thank you. Motion on the floor, we'll do roll call voting. Mr. Dickerson?
Aye.
Mr. Howell? Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Ostertag?
Aye.
Mr. Massengale?
Aye.
McVeigh? Aye. Motion carries. County manager's updates.
Commissioners, I have 2 updates for you, one fairly quick and one really quick. Governor Cooper has indicated that he will lift the North Carolina State of Emergency Declaration on August 15th. And I think we can all agree that that's good, that the state has gotten to a place where we can lift that state of emergency. However, it does mean a couple changes for local government. The most impactful for this board, I think, change that it makes is the state of emergency law specifically allows remote board member participation in meetings and provides that elected city and county board members who are participating remotely count towards the establishment of a quorum and may vote and have their votes counted as long as they are connected. Although the open meeting law recognizes electronic meetings as official meetings, before the state of emergency law, there was no clear statutory authority for elected board members to participate remotely. County commissioners voting and quorum statutes make reference to members having to be present and members having to be physically present. That fact suggests that remote participation is not authorized. Further, there is the fact that the state of emergency law specifically provides that board members participating remote count towards a quorum and when voting. There would be no need for these provisions if these boards already had that authority under the existing law. After taking all of that into consideration, it seems that after the state of emergency law expires, city and county governing boards will have no clear authority to participate in remote meetings at all. That does not mean you can't continue to Zoom your meetings. You can if that's the way the board wishes to continue. You can still Zoom these meetings out to the public. But what, in my opinion, what it does mean is there will be no more commissioner links. There will only be the public link. If a commissioner decides, I want to watch it remotely, they would use the public link and would not be allowed to participate in discussion or voting or count towards a quorum. Their present count towards a quorum. So that is to become effective on August 15th. That's when we expect Governor Cooper to rescind the state of emergency. August 15th happens to be a meeting date for us. It's a night meeting, so that will happen during the day. Theoretically, it will happen during the day, so that will be the first meeting that remote participation will no longer be allowed. Are there any questions?
Is that what the county attorney believes also?
County attorney is with us. I'll let him speak towards that.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Massengale. Largely, yes. It is, I think, the prevailing view that local governments will not have the ability to vote and have, for quorum purposes, have remote attendance from board members. I do believe the biggest risk factor is that there's no express statutory authorization outside of the emergency declaration. So if you took an action that relied on a quorum from a remote member or relied on a deciding vote from a remotely participating member, the action itself could be called into question. So that's the legal issue, and that's why the guidance that the county manager has suggested about remote participation is strict. I will say that some local governments have adopted policies that permit participation in certain instances from remote participation from board members, so long as it's not necessary to constitute a quorum, that is physically present in the hearing room, or enough commissioners to meet the quorum. And also that there's safeguards in place that a remote participant does not cast a deciding vote on any given issue, because there again, that opens the county's actions to challenge based on that remote participation. So the county manager has outlined to you a bright line rule that's relatively easy to implement and follow, which is, as to the governing board, remote attendance and participation isn't, permitted after the emergency declaration is lifted. That's certainly a one approach. If the county's interested in perhaps some more flexibility, I think there are ways to do that, but that such a policy would need to be carefully crafted to make sure we don't run afoul of the statutory authority that we have. That's my view on it.
Thank you.
So, Commissioner, are there any other questions?
What about boards that meet? Does this cover them as well?
This applies to, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Farrell, but my interpretation of this is it applies specifically to elected boards. There may be some authority for other boards to participate remotely, but not county elected, not county and town, city elected boards.
The one addition I would have to that is I believe it also applies to any quasi-judicial decision-making body. So for instance, the Board of Adjustment would need to meet in person when hearing quasi-judicial matters, special use permits to the extent that they're required to advise on those, ordinance interpretation appeals. Any quasi-judicial board is subject to the in-person requirements we've just talked about.
Any additional questions? So the last update I have for you commissioners is tomorrow night is Caswell County night at the Burlington Sock Puppets game. I know there'll be a number of residents from the county and a number of county employees attending the game. Please, if you're so inclined, come out and enjoy Caswell County night at the Burlington Sock Puppets Stadium. If you have any questions about the game, it starts at 7 o'clock tomorrow night. If you have any additional questions, please contact myself or Carla. We'll get you the information that you need. And that's all I have.
Commissioner comments. Does any of the commissioners have any comments they want to make?
One thing I like, where they at on dog right through. That's kind of nice.
Did you understand that, sir?
An update for Dog Ranch Road.
Yeah.
Clerk and I rode out with Representative Myers' assistant probably 3 weeks ago. It's probably been 3 weeks ago. They wanted to find out what was going on Dog Ranch Road. The clerk and I had been out to the road before, and we had spoken to Jason Julie with the Department of Transportation about the road. And interestingly enough, the day that we rode out, they were replacing the culvert on Dog Ranch Road with a larger culvert, which will, not want to say, I don't know, we haven't had rain that would substantiate it, but the engineers seem to think that that would relieve them of the flooding concerns that they had. Yeah, they actually said that the flooding was not necessarily coming from the rain falling there, but it was coming from the rising river backing up the flows into the river. And that's why they were experiencing the flooding. So I know the Department of Transportation has worked on it. They've replaced the culvert, I believe, at this point. And they're searching within their budgets for money to pay what they need to pay. Up to, as you may know, there's one house that they can't seem to get authorization from, but they'll pay it up to that house.
Any more commissioner comments? If not, we'll move on to announcements. We have a commissioner meeting August the 1st at 9:30 a.m. here at the courthouse. Then we have the NCACC annual conference, August 11th through the 13th in Charlotte. And the commissioner meeting on August the 15th at 6:30 p.m. here in the courthouse. If there's no more questions, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. I'll do roll call voting. Mr. Dickerson?
Aye.
Mr. Howell? Aye. Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Understriker? Mr. Massengill? Aye. Mr. Vay? Motion carries, and we now sit adjourned. Thank you.